Members of the congressional committee that investigated Donald Trump's actions following the 2020 election are pushing back against Trump's claims that they should be jailed. During an interview over the weekend, Trump singled out Democratic Committee Chairman Benny Thompson as well as Liz Cheney, a Republican member of the committee. In response, committee members said it was Trump and his supporters who rampaged through the Capitol who were engaged in criminal conduct, not those who investigated. Joining me to discuss this and more, Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Brett, Trump said that they should be in jail, but that he won't instruct the DOJ to investigate. All this comes as there are these talks in the Biden administration of whether or not to issue these preemptive pardons for people like Thompson and Cheney. Do comments like what Trump said over the weekend put more pressure on Biden to consider that type of action?
Yeah, I think that the comments about the January 6th committee in particular were interesting because in this interview that you mentioned with Meet the Press, President-elect Trump would sort of repeatedly say that he wasn't personally interested in going after his political rivals, that he was going to leave it to the Justice Department, leave it to the FBI of his administration to determine these things. But when it came to the January 6th committee, that was the one area where he specifically said these people should be in jail. So I do think those comments, certainly maybe raise some alarms inside the White House, given that they were already mulling potential pardons. Obviously, Adam Schiff, for example, has said that he doesn't want to pardon. Liz Cheney, Benny Thompson, Adam Kinzinger were members of that committee. Whether they actually want to pardon and whether that implies some kind of guilt is sort of an open question. But I do think it will just sort of add fuel to this fire of whether pardons are coming.
Let's talk about an update on some of the nominees to be in incoming President Trump's cabinet. 77 Nobel Laureates issued this letter urging the Senate to not approve RFK Jr.'s nomination to lead the Health and Human Services Department. These laureates stem from fields in medicine, chemistry, physics, economics. What's their argument?
Yeah, I think this argument gets at sort of the broad concerns with this nomination, that RFK Jr. is somebody who has espoused anti-vaccination views. He's talked about, consuming raw milk. He's talked about, most recently removing fluoride from the water. And these Nobel laureates are kind of echoing what we've heard from other experts, which is just broad concerns that putting RFK Jr. in charge of this agency would undermine confidence in, not just vaccinations, for example, but research into public health. The HHS agency oversees the FDA, for example, the CDC. These are agencies that oversee pandemic response. They oversee research into drugs that could go on the market, vaccines, obviously. So as part of this broad argument, I think that people just worry that RFK Jr. Is sort of a dangerous choice here and would undermine confidence in public health.
Are people listening on Capitol Hill? The American Medical Association is extremely powerful here in Washington. Kennedy has been signaling that he wants to change how Medicare reimburses doctors. Are the AMA and other agencies like this, organizations like this, going to fight Kennedy, or do they think it's a better strategy maybe to just continue lobbying members of Congress who they have good contacts with, and that's how to fight any of these proposed changes?
Yeah, it does seem like groups like that may remain active on Capitol Hill more than trying to lobby RFK Jr. It's interesting, RFK Jr. has sort of, made a big to-do about fighting big pharma, about fighting back against, companies that are putting chemicals in food, things like that. So some of these groups may see it as a better route to go and talk to members of Congress who would have to legislate on some of these issues. But certainly it'd be interesting to see, for all the controversy around some of Trump's other nominees, we haven't seen any sort of outright no's or senators, particularly Republican senators, who have just come out and said that they're opposed to RFK Jr. as a nominee. So does seem like he may not just get sort of a chilly reception necessarily on Capitol Hill.
Another one of the controversial nominees is Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. Trump standing by him, even though it was reported previously that he was floating alternative names, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Hegseth met with Joni Ernst, an influential Republican senator from Iowa. Ernst said that she had an encouraging meeting with Hegseth. He's going to be meeting with Lisa Murkowski today, Republican of Alaska, and Susan Collins, a Republican of Maine, tomorrow, two other senators that have been at times skeptical of Trump and his picks for this type of positions. Do you think the tides for Pete Hegseth are turning?
I think it's fair to say that they do seem to be. A week ago when we were hearing about Trump floating Ron DeSantis' name, it seemed like the writing was kind of on the wall for Pete Hegseth, that once Ron DeSantis' name was out there, how does Pete Hegseth come back from that? And yet, after this meeting with Joni Ernst, who is seen as a really pivotal senator, Joni Ernst herself is a sexual assault survivor. She served in the military. She's very influential on these issues.
Hegseth has faced accusations in the past that he denies of sexual misconduct.
Right, and that's sort of at the heart of some of these opposition to his nomination. But certainly just a few days ago, Joni Ernst was saying that she wasn't at a yes for his nomination. Now she's saying that they had a really positive meeting, that she wants Pete Hegseth to have a hearing. So
used the words "as I support him through the process," which seemed pretty approving.
Sort of implied that she's not opposing his nomination, that she's going to kind of see this through. So I do think that those are all indications that Pete Hegseth does seem to be on a better track. He can still afford to lose 3 Republican votes instead of J.D. Vance be the tiebreaker to confirm him, assuming all Democrats vote against him. So if Joni Ernst is on board, which her statement seems to suggest she is, at least for the time being, that would be good news for Pete Hegseth.
There are 2 weeks left in this lame duck session of Congress and only 10 days until government funding runs out. There's a lot of talk of a continuing resolution to March. Republicans and Democrats, are they going to work together on this? Because it seems like there might be some detractors on the right wing of the Republican Party. I know there's a lot of motivation to try to get this into next year when Republicans take over Congress. Democrats seem to be eager to kind of go along with that plan. What's your take?
Yeah, it is interesting you mentioned sort of the right-wing opposition. It seems whenever there's a funding fight, the sort of far right wing, the conservative wing, the Freedom Caucus, is always sort of a thorn in the side of Republican leadership. But, given the margins in the House in particular, where there's just, in the current Congress, there's only a few seat margin. In the next Congress, there will be only a couple seat margin, especially with some of those nominees Trump is plucking them from the House. There's not a lot of wiggle room for Republicans to do this on their own. So it does seem they're going to have to find Democratic support, which of course could then influence what makes it into this year-end spending bill, which will likely, of course, be short-term, punted into next year when the Trump administration takes office.
President Biden says his policies have produced a record number of jobs, helped minority businesses, reduce inflation. These are comments that he made today at the Brookings Institution, where he was talking about his economic policy. He contrasted that with tax cuts that he says are skewed to the wealthy, cuts to entitlement programs. Sounds like he's criticizing what he sees as the policy positions of the incoming Trump administration.
Absolutely. The speech that President Biden gave was sort of interesting because on the one hand, it was sort of this legacy speech where he's touting all that his administration accomplished, the investments that they've made in small businesses and manufacturing and clean energy, et cetera. And at the same time, he's basically laying down the gauntlet and sort of challenging the incoming Trump administration and saying, that he's skeptical that their strategy will work better, that the sort of proposed tax cuts, tariffs, proposals that Trump has floated for his economic agenda, Biden is out here basically saying, let's see in 4 years if inflation is lower, if wages are higher, if unemployment is lower. So President Biden, simultaneously sort of taking a victory lap, but also sort of saying, pushing back on the skeptics and saying, let's wait and see if the new guy actually works out better.
Imagine Democrats are going to use those benchmarks as measurements for the incoming administration. White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients has outlined a proposal for what they seek to accomplish in the last few weeks here of the Biden administration. One of the things I felt is kind of most interesting is additional student loan debt cancellation. 1 in 10 debtors have received some form of relief during the Biden administration, but there is pressure from advocacy groups to go further. Where could the Biden administration focus in these final weeks? There's been talk about relief for people that went to for-profit colleges, older borrowers. Where's the focus?
Yeah, I think those areas that you just mentioned, for folks who went to for-profit colleges, is going to be a big focus. And I think more broadly, this is part of what we're going to see from the Biden administration in these final weeks is where obviously the Trump administration, Republican-controlled Congress, they're not interested in student loan forgiveness. In fact, they've been vocal about how they don't even think it's constitutional. So I think we're going to see the Biden White House really try to accelerate things like student loan debt forgiveness, like making sure funds are allocated for the Inflation Reduction Act, American Rescue Plan, these Democratic-led pieces of legislation where there is concern that as soon as Trump takes office, those things are cut off. They're not going to be interested in continuing to sort of see those through. So certainly I think those are going to be the highest priorities in these final few weeks here.
On the foreign policy front, I imagine a ceasefire in Gaza that includes some sort of deal to release hostages is still one of the remaining issues out there that Biden would love to score a win on before he leaves office. Any indication that that's possible?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely the highest priority, and maybe the one thing that you could argue is achievable potentially, just given where things stand in Ukraine, where things stand now in Syria. Those are things that are going to linger into the next administration. I think there's sort of broad skepticism that a deal will actually get done, especially if Israel, for example, sees the incoming Trump administration as maybe more supportive and more willing to back them before agreeing to some kind of ceasefire or agreeing to some kind of hostage deal. But certainly that's something that the Biden administration has said that they'll continue to push for right to the very end.
All right, running out of time here, but it'll be interesting to see what they attempt to get accomplished in these final weeks. Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
The fast-moving Franklin fire that broke out late last night in Malibu Canyon, California is spreading quickly as firefighters scramble to contain the wildfire. Thousands are evacuated and more than 2,200 acres are scorched. News Nation's Nancy Liu is near Malibu with the latest on the inferno.
Drew, very much a dynamic and evolving situation here in Malibu. Behind me, fire crews just got done putting out a couple of the hot spots here in this area, but you can see how smoky it is, and there are more hot spots up in the hills and beyond the canyon here. About 6,000 Malibu residents are under mandatory evacuation orders. That's out of 11,000 residents of Malibu. This fire, the Franklin fire, erupted overnight. It broke out just before 11 p.m. right near Pepperdine University, near the library. And then the winds, the Santa Ana winds, kicked up and just spread this fire quickly. It is now up to about 2,200 acres, containment at 0. So fire crews are extremely busy working to contain this thing. The good news is that the bulk of the fire has moved beyond the university. However, students at Pepperdine told to shelter in place. That is still the case. The power has been cut out. It's a unique situation because crews know that, these students, they don't have cars. There are many of them here from throughout the country. So the situation is that fire crews know to protect the entire area around Pepperdine and all of those students. But outside, the fire continues to spread because the Santa Ana winds are unpredictable, and these gusts are picking up embers, dropping them elsewhere, starting new fires. So there are new fires all over Malibu today, and that's what fire crews are busy with. Hundreds of crews at work right now. There are air tankers dropping retardant, as well as helicopters dropping water on those hot spots. But for now, no containment, and this Franklin fire is still a big job for LA County Fire and CAL FIRE as well. Drew, back to you.
News Nation's Nancy Liu, thank you. The auction house that sold right-wing commentator Alex Jones's platform InfoWars is back in court Tuesday to defend its decision to sell to satirical news outlet The Onion last month. Jones has asked a judge to disqualify The Onion's bid, alleging they colluded with the trustee overseeing the auction in order to win, and claims that a dietary supplement company that he's affiliated with submitted a cash offer twice the size of The Onion's $7 million winning bid. 360 Asset Advisors is the auction house responsible for liquidating Jones's assets after he received a nearly $1.5 billion judgment against him and later filed for bankruptcy. That judgment resulted from several defamation lawsuits brought by the relatives of victims of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. On Monday, the president of 360 Asset Advisors testified in court defending the decision to not hold a live auction and ultimately award InfoWars to The Onion. The trustee in charge of overseeing the sale of Jones's assets is set to take the stand today. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.